Hello, everyone. Welcome to SJU. You've got Eric, you've got Kim, and we're going to talk about Star Wars, The Book of Boba Fett, Episode 2, or Chapter 2, if you want to go by what the show says, The Tribes of Tatooine. We're going to do full spoilers, so you know the drill. But if you haven't seen the episode, you're about to hear everything that happened in it. So maybe you should go watch it first and come back. But if you have seen the episode, or you don't mind spoilers, just one of those people, all right, we're going to go for it. 3, 2, 1. Full spoilers for the episode follow. All right, this was the second episode of the show, written by Jon Favreau again, directed by Steph Green this time. She's new to the Star Wars universe. She has a ton of TV direction credits, Watchmen, The Americans, Luke Cage. And we were just talking before we started recording about how the episode lengths on these things really throw you because there's no consistency. I think last week was 38 minutes. This one was 53 minutes. Kim, do you like consistency in episode lengths, or do you like that you just don't know each week what you're going to get?
Yeah, I like the inconsistency. I like the just don't know because, why should there be a time scale on the length the story needs to be? I like that each episode is just as long as it needs to be, and that's what they serve up.
Yeah, there is something to be said to that because they don't have to fit 44-minute time slot or whatever for network TV. So they just do what they feel each week that story calls for. It did stand out to me. I checked because I was curious. 53 minutes. I was like, this sounds pretty long for Star Wars on Disney Plus. One episode of The Mandalorian was longer than this, which was the season 2 premiere. Otherwise, this was the second longest episode of TV that they've produced so far on Disney Plus. But I thought it was a pretty fun one. As someone who was, a little ho-hum on the first episode, there was things I liked, but it wasn't grabbing me. I like this one a lot more, though I still have some questions. What did you think overall of this episode, Kim?
Well, overall, it was really strong for me. I enjoyed the first one. It sounds like I know you enjoyed it, but it sounds like I maybe liked it more than
I think you liked it a little more than me. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, for me, so that I'm not sure it will satisfy people who maybe weren't exactly sure what this show is or where it's going yet. But if you're just enjoying the journey, there was a lot to enjoy. For me, there were a couple of good action set pieces, so we were given that, but also it gave a deeper insight into Boba Fett's character, and it becomes clear to me that he's going on a spiritual journey, and we're going along with him. Now that's clear. And actually more revealingly and perhaps more satisfyingly, we got this deeper insight into the Sand People, or the Tuscan Raiders.
Yeah.
Which is kind of rehabilitating their image. And I like what they're doing. And then, of course, on top of all of this, we got a dream within a dream within a dream sequence, which was very Inception. And also, we've got dream sequences in the Star Wars universe. It's not completely out of the blue. But I love for me, it felt quite Jodorowsky inspired, and the whole Dune influence on Star Wars is kind of laid bare as well. And Westerns and all of that. And there was so much in it for me. I'll stop there for now.
I've meant to begin this by asking who wants to go into the desert and snort some lizard?
Hallucinogizzard.
Right. It is funny because I felt like we know kind of like drugs exist in Star Wars, like spice and death sticks, but I felt like they didn't want to show like he's going on a spiritual journey, maybe with some help from substances. So they made the substance like a physical being, like a lizard. That's basically what he was doing, right? Yeah,
well, isn't there a frog that you can lick that's hallucinogenic?
Yes. So I think that was tied to it there. That was very interesting sort of, it's because the Star Wars movies, especially the original trilogy and the prequels, had very sort of strict like cinematic rules. Like there were never flashbacks and there were never on-screen title cards, and we started to see them bend that even with Rogue One and some of the movies that weren't like the saga movies, and now they're bending it even more, which I think is great. Like they shouldn't have to stick to that, and to have like this sort of trip out sequence in the desert, I thought was really cool. I like this episode a lot because it just had a lot of cool Star Wars stuff, and I completely agree with you. Like the deepening of the Tuscan Raiders, which began on The Mandalorian, but we're continuing much more here was really cool. I think the big question of like, what is this show? Because we were a little vague going into it. The trailers have been kind of purposely holding back from telling you a lot story-wise. I think still the most surprising thing to me is that there's not a lot of like urgency to the present day stuff. It feels like the creators, like Favreau, is most interested in the flashbacks, but that stuff's really good. So it's not like I'm complaining. It is just kind of funny that it almost feels like there could have been a version of this show that was like, let's just fill in the time gap between Return of the Jedi and when he shows up in Mandalorian. Because so far that stuff has like been the most cool and interesting stuff. Like, what do you think of kind of weighing it versus the stuff we're seeing of him as the crime lord?
Yeah, I mean, I think the balance will shift as we go through this season. But I was thinking about this and I thought, well, it is called the Book of Boba Fett, which suggests a kind of a diary or the story of, and so it makes total sense that we're going to learn about those gaps that kind of need filling in some depth, and so I'm just happy to sit back and enjoy it. And as you say, they've done it pretty well so far. This episode, based mainly in flashback, was really cool.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the first like 15 minutes were the present day crime lord stuff, and then it went to flashbacks and it never came back, which again we just didn't know structurally going in what the show would be. And even when the flashbacks were in the first episode, I think maybe we thought, I shouldn't say we, I thought maybe it'd be more like Lost, maybe be like we're getting our present day story and we keep going back and forth. But here they spend a lot of time in the flashback, and here was like minute 15 to the very end. And we're not leaving on cliffhangers. We're just leaving on kind of important milestones for him with the Tuscan. So I think it's more like, that's not bad. I think it's more just like reassess your expectations going in. I think we kind of thought because of the Mandalorian, well, they'll leave on these little mini cliffhangers and this character's back or what's next. And that, like you said, that can change as they go into the season more. But right now, that doesn't seem to be what the sort of importance of the show is at the moment. But as long as it's strong stuff in the flashbacks, there's nothing wrong with that, right?
No, I agree. And actually, even the present day stuff is in the past, isn't it? Because Star Wars has moved on since
right, then. Right. It's all very confusing, right? Like, yeah, I just thought of the Spaceballs of like, when is then is now, or that whole. Let's talk. Let's go through the first 50 minutes a bit here, because the one sort of like narrative drive is who tried to kill him in the first episode. And we started to get a little bit more understanding of like the different power players going on here. And the group that specifically tried to kill him were called the Nightwings, the Order of the Nightwings, I should say. And the one guy said it was the mayor, who seemed like an obvious suspect. We didn't see the mayor in the first episode, but we knew that the mayor wanted to be paid money. But the mayor said it wasn't me, that hammerhead mayor. And then what did you think of the introduction of both the mayor and the twins? We met a couple new, I don't think they got names, but sister and brother Hutts here.
Yeah, well, I said last week that I was really keen to meet the mayor, and I have now. And I think that he has some connection to the Hutt twins, but probably in some kind of subjugated way. I think his species is a peaceful species, and I expect he's being pushed around, controlled somewhat by these two nice people. Can I call them people?
You can, because Han Solo said, Jabba, you're a wonderful human being in A New Hope when they put that scene back in. So it's established.
I felt so sorry for the creature that he was using to mop his brow.
That was very funny. The fact that he's just got this little poor creature that's
and he must have very absorbent fur.
Yes, yeah. The Hutts are, they're weird and fun, and so I did like the introduction of more of this realm. Again, we don't know why why Boba wants to be in charge as a crime lord, but hopefully I think the stuff in the past will keep informing more of that.
Yeah, I still think that he just wants to create a for whatever reason, a just and fair environment for the people who don't have a voice or, you know, a defense. You know, that we saw that in these flashback sequences. He was fighting for the Tuscans, and well, he set them up to now kind of defend themselves, hasn't he? But it was interesting that they said that we're kind of not all the same. Some of our tribes kill people, and that kind of justifies Anakin's actions, I suppose.
Well, I think it also justifies the fact that, you know, those Tuscans, from all we knew, took Shmi Skywalker, tortured her, and killed her. So we have to kind of reconcile that with, like, hey, maybe the Tuscans aren't these horrible creatures they made out to be, but by saying that some of these tribes kind of more outwardly go out to kill. I think it was a nice way to cover that. One lingering thing I wanted to mention before we kind of go full into the flashback stuff is the introduction of a new Wookiee, well, but not a new Wookiee. This episode was filled with Easter egg kind of deep cut stuff for Star Wars fans. And I actually really appreciate how they did it, because none of it was done in a way that I thought was distracting if you didn't know who these characters were. But so it goes with this guy who is named Black Kersantan. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, because I've never heard it said. I've only read it in a comic book, because that's where this guy comes from. A lot of the Star Wars comic books, the character Dr. Aphra, who's a very popular character in the comics, he's been involved in a lot of stories with her. Even if you didn't know that, it's just kind of like, ooh, bad Wookiee, because all the live action Wookiees have been pretty good. You know, mostly obviously Chewbacca first and foremost, but the other ones we met in Revenge of the Sith, they all seem pretty like noble. This guy is obviously trouble, whether you know him from the comic books or not. So I thought it was pretty cool to see him stomp into the screen here. What'd you think, getting a little menacing Wookiee here?
Yeah, totally. Very cool. I didn't know him from the comics. I haven't read the comics, but you know, it was obvious that they were introducing him with the lingering shots of him as a Wookiee to be reckoned with. So yes. I hope we see more from him.
I think we will. I should mention, in the comics, which again, these are the canon comics that Disney made, they know each other, Boba and him. They once were put on a mission together. The way I actually rewatched the scene to make sure, you could still say they know each other. Like, it didn't contradict that. Like, you know, it's like Boba just, again, I thought it was good to not have Boba be like, ooh, and because sometimes those Easter egg things can kind of be, I understand, annoying if you don't get the reference, because they put too big a spotlight on it. Here it was just like, again, if you don't know him, that's totally fine. He still made his presence known. So I think we, knock on wood, we will see more of him, because who doesn't want to see Boba fight a big evil Wookiee? Evil, we'll see. Yeah, he's on the place. So let's go into the flashbacks more, and certainly, yeah, we already knew this about Boba, but this episode especially was very Dances with Wolves, very Avatar, very like the guy who gets assimilated into, he goes native, and really becomes part of this group, of this tribe. So while it's a familiar sort of tale, I thought they did a very good job of it. I really liked seeing, last week it was more like him getting the tiny little bit of respect at the end, but here it's like how he joined the gang. What would you think of and we got some nice training montages. What do you think of the time we got here with Boba and the Tuscans, which is the new band name?
Excellent. I'll come and see you.
Excellent, thank you.
I you know, you mentioned those films also, you know, just generally westerns. He's the outsider, the loner coming in, and helps I wouldn't call them helpless, but I suppose they are in this case against the force of what they call the long speeder, well, I've forgotten what they've called it, but
yeah, something like that.
So you know, they didn't have the wherewithal, the equipment, the machinery to fight against this huge train that comes through their territory, and he equips them with that. So he's the outsider, as in the Western, that comes in and helps the little guy.
Yeah, because he comes from the world they do not, and so he understands how that world works, and he can help them, while they can also give him new skills, like how to use a gaffy stick.
Yes.
to attack.
Yeah, and then of course he gets to make his own
He
gaffy
gets to make
stick.
his own. Yeah. So yeah, he of course, look, Star Wars is draped in Western imagery, and even the episode last season of Mandalorian with Cobb Vanth was so Western as far as like the small town and the sheriff. This one uses that in a big time. It's about like a train heist essentially. I really liked when he goes and first meets up with and takes the guy's speeder bikes. They also are definitely kind of dressed to look like what we would think of as a modern day biker gang. It all crosses over because obviously people have a million times made the comparison between a biker gang and a group of outlaws on cowboy on horses. So I thought that was kind of just a fun blending of all that imagery here in an episode that went way big on the Western motif. I want to talk a bit about that scene though, where he goes in and into that sort of small little place, because that was the other big Easter eggy scene of this episode. He goes into a place that isn't named, but that is believed to be the mythical Tosche Station, where Luke Skywalker just wanted to go and get some damn power converters, because there was a scene in Tosche Station that was cut, but there's been images and clips of it shown. So they basically recreated the set here. Again, you didn't need to know that, but it's just like a fun layering thing. Certainly Wikipedia is very excited about that, and well, they should be. And then I want to talk about this couple sitting up here on the front right here who get a moment as he kind of tries to stand up to this group, and we kind of get the idea things are going to go very bad for him until Boba walks in, because that's Cammy and Fixer, and they were Luke Skywalker's pals on Tatooine. She was his crush, Luke's crush, according to some of the books and whatnot. Different actors playing them because it's 40 something years later and they're supposed to be like 5 years older. But again, deep cut. You didn't need to know that, but I thought that was really fun. But what do you think about Boba here again? Because he was just a silent, we knew he's dangerous and silent in the original trilogy, but he comes in here and he gets to be much more sort of the a little bit of vigilante justice here. Do you like how we're completely recontextualizing him?
I do, yeah, he comes in. I mean, his goal here is to take these speeder bikes, but presumably they're the same people that he witnessed attacking the guy in the last episode. So he knows that they're bad people. He knows that they're causing problems in this bar. So he doesn't hesitate to just kind of take them out, and he's brutal. And I, although it was kind of a very swift takedown and kind of workmanlike, what I loved about it was that, and also we saw it in the last episode too, but the faces that he pulls, he looks kind of so savage when he's fighting people. And I feel like some of these expressions are almost like the haka, he's like a Maori warrior, and of course that's the actor's heritage, which I'm sure he must have drawn on for this. One thing that I loved about this sequence was when he says when he goes to do what he's doing, he's going to take a stick and a rifle, and he mainly uses the rifle as a stick just to batter people. And then I think it breaks and he's like, all right then, well, I'll carry on with my gaffy stick.
Again, because Boba Fett was cooler in theory than he was in practice until a couple years ago. I think it's really important to show him doing cool stuff without that armor, right? Like, and that's what the flashbacks are doing, because we know he's not going to get the armor until 5 years later in The Mandalorian. So getting him to not just deepen him as a character, that's very important, of course, to follow him as the protagonist, but also to show that he is a formidable warrior. He can take on these guys. He doesn't need the cool jetpack and shooting the little rockets out of his wrist to do all this stuff.
Yeah, and he's just as intimidating without it, because those expressions on his face are
yes,
totally badass.
And I mentioned earlier, I'm a sucker for a good training montage, and we got Boba trains the Tuscans on speeder bikes here, which I thought was a lot of fun, even though, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I felt like we spent so much time with that one guy training to jump onto a speeder bike, but I don't think that actually happens during the heist, which surprised me.
But did that Tuscan jump from the speeder bike onto the train? Was that the same one?
He might have, yeah. It just felt like such a specific moment. I don't
know. Come on, we got to get this right. Oh, but we're not going to use the move.
Maybe it's more for like a show they're going to do, like to entertain the other Tuscans.
Cirque du Soleil style.
Right? But no, I thought that stuff was really fun.
It was fun.
And also, oh, sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I just wanted to mention, you know, the humor in the episode, which there were several moments that were laugh out loud, and this was one of them.
It was, and it's, you know, you, of course, you don't want Boba to be like a silly character, but it doesn't mean he can't be kind of part of comedic moments. So, like, I liked even when he's trying to show them with this, he's like a bantha, and then I think, can't remember what he says. He said something like, maybe not, or like when he's like, they're not following, so he's just like, whatever. I thought that stuff was great, and just to give him these little nuances, so he's not just a guy, you know, he was literally faceless for decades, so
yeah.
You know, better to get this. And then I thought the train heist was a lot of fun. Again, classic cowboy stuff. But yeah, like the whole thing with that little engine blast that kept happening that they'd have to duck out of the way of. I love the droid conductor with all those arms. Just in general, I don't know if you felt this. I think you did feel the same way, but I don't want to speak for you. You know, Robert Rodriguez directed the first episode, but I have to say, I felt the action was so much better in this one that Steph Green did. I just thought like this stuff like really moved and had an energy to it that some of the action was lacking in the first episode.
Yeah, I think I would agree. You know, of course, this isn't we've seen the kind of speeding train and the action atop the speeding train in so many things, but it's also not the first time it's happened in Star Wars, because we had the train heist in Solo, of course. But this felt really different, and there felt like there was a real emotional pull during the sequence, because we've grown to become really attached to these Tuscan Raiders, even though, you know, we've not seen their faces or heard them speak in our language. They've done a great job of building this attachment into them on behalf of the audience. And on top of that, there was humor in the fight too, you know, and the guy that went through the train and just took all of those Pike Syndicate members. We haven't spoken about the Pike Syndicate yet, but out just like that, you know, was cool. And then he pops his head up out the hatch, and it's all like, oh, okay.
I totally agree. I guess you know, on an episode I'm very positive about, I guess mixing in my you know, some of the little criticism I have right now is just that I hope they can do the same in the present day stuff. Like, I love Ming-Na Wen as Fennec Shan, but we haven't gotten a lot about what do her and Boba like make of each other. Like, they respect each other, we get that. But I want to get more into their dynamic, because we're getting it with the Tuscans, right? Like, we're getting like a lot of great time between these Boba and this group of people. And then you mentioned the Pike Syndicate, who are the guys who are in charge on that train. That he's, you know, he talks to one of them afterwards, and turns out they're spice runners. They're part of Star Wars lore in a lot of ways. They're in the Clone Wars. There were many episodes. They were actually in Solo briefly. And I'll give a shout out and you should check out a pitch for an article that we have on Fandom that I think should be a link in the description. But Brian Young wrote an article for us about kind of all the different criminal groups of note that Boba Fett could encounter on this show. And obviously the Hutts was one of them, but so was the Pike Syndicate. So two of them came around in this one episode. So you should check that out. And then we talked about it at the top, but any other thoughts on Boba's little nose lizard journey into the desert there?
What I'm calling that, and it's not easy to say, hallucinogizzard. Right? Yeah.
Copyright.
Psychotropic lizard.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this was another moment that I mentioned Jodorowsky at the start, and I don't want to go too deeply into the parallels, but this was one, you know, there's the whole Aztec lizard sequence in the Holy Mountain that it reminded me of, but also the whole dreamscapes thing that he is into, that showed here, and this idea that he's on a spiritual journey. Boba Fett's on a spiritual journey, and he's ditching kind of this seeking of money as a bounty hunter for this searching of his soul. And at the end of this sequence, the dream sequence here, there's a splashing, and it's a symbolic rebirth. So kind of his second rebirth already in the show, because the first one was him coming out of the Sarlacc.
Right. But they make sure to show you that he comes from Camino, which is obviously a world that it's raining all the time and oceans. So there's a nice little cyclical thing there with that water imagery, especially on a show set on literally a desert planet. I liked all that stuff a lot. I thought that was really cool and just an interesting thing. I thought to myself, man, this is like they should put some Doors music over this. This is like an Oliver Stone movie sequence happening here.
Although Ludwig Göransson's score did do a pretty good job.
It did. Oh, and I'm so glad you mentioned his name, because even though we're talking about just people working on the show, but I wanted to mention that Dean Kundi was the DP, the director of photography for this episode. And if you don't know his name, everyone, you know his work, because he's a cinematographer on Halloween, as in the original, Back to the Future, Jurassic Park, just an insane list of like amazing movies that look great. And suddenly he's working in Star Wars. I thought he'd retired, but I guess maybe he's semi-retired, or maybe he didn't at all. But I'm glad to see him working here on Star Wars on an episode that I think we thought looked really cool and moved really well. So lots of great people involved there. Let's do a couple things from the chat here. I do think it's interesting. Maybe I'll kind of read these together, because this is where I think you're seeing some conflict from some of the audience on this show, which is Lieutenant Buddha saying, Boba Fett might be the best character development in the Star Wars universe, or even the DEU, which he says means, she says means Disney Extended Universe, all of Disney. That's a lot, depending on where they take it in the rest of the episodes, of course. But on the flip side, you have Arthur Mingo saying, it's starting to feel boring for me because we know how the flashbacks resolve themselves. I mean, I feel like, we're pretty much on the same page here, Kim, but I don't know. For me, the flashback thing, this is the prequel conundrum, right? It's like, well, we know he survives. Like, we know what's going to happen to him, but I think there's a lot of room for like him showing up in the Mandalorian, in those robes, which now we saw him get. And like, well, what he was doing, I don't think it's important. It's only important to know that, oh, he lives and he'll become a crime lord. I think that there's a lot of nuance there that I think that they're doing a good job exploring. I assume you feel the same.
I do. I don't really have anything to add to that. I do feel exactly the same. You're right. There are a lot of people that don't appreciate prequels, and I understand that, because I do appreciate a prequel, but maybe kind of hypocritically, I don't really like films where you see the ending at the beginning and then it shows you how they get there. So that probably is a bit hypocritical, but I do like a prequel. I don't know where I'm going with that, but
I think it cycles back into the fact that like so far the flashback stuff is so much more interesting to me than the present day stuff. And I do wonder, it's like going into the show, maybe they felt like again, I'm just speculating based on these 2 episodes, because things can change a lot in the weeks to come. Like they were most interested in the prequel aspect, but maybe they felt like they had to hedge their bets and have this stuff showing him later as well. But yeah, it's interesting how right now, I in no way do I feel like, oh, we know where it's going, so that's not interesting. I feel, because we joked about it, but it's true. It's like, okay, we're still just a few months out, we assume, from Return of the Jedi, of him crawling out of there. It's like, why doesn't he go get his armor? Like, what, and why does he finally decide he is? If he like goes native, if he joins the Tuscans and he's one of them, and certainly that's what the end of this episode is, why does he ever leave? And I think that is really interesting stuff, still to explore.
Yes.
Let's see. I came along a similar thing here is Phantasmister. I hope I'm saying that right. I love the quiet, considered pacing This is the book of Boba Fett, not the action movie of Boba Fett. That's true. The first Star Wars had a similar flavor, no rush to get where it was going. Yeah, I think that's like the pacing thing. I don't think the show is badly paced. I just think that it's going to be tricky for people who want like cliffhanger momentum right now, right? But yeah, I agree a bit that it does, not just because of the Tatooine setting. There's something about the like the hangout feel that reminds me of the original Star Wars, but not in a bad way. What do you think of the pacing so far?
Yeah, agree. I agree with this comment. I'm happy, like I said at the beginning, to just go along with the journey, and I'm not in a rush to get anywhere. I wasn't in a rush with The Mandalorian either, and just enjoyed that for what it was, although that did deliver us some cliffhangers. But one of the things that they've got really right about this series so far is this balance between this feel of OG Star Wars and kind of a newness, you know, in like the last episode I felt had a strong Robert Rodriguez flair, blended with traditional Star Wars, and this felt similarly kind of progressive but old school.
Oh, by the way, the same person, Phantasmister, has a correction for us, which I think they're actually, I think, Ryan, they are right about this, because I remember this from last week, which is that Ludwig is not scoring the whole show. He wrote like the main themes, but Joseph Shirley is like the actual like composer week to week of it.
Credit to Joseph Shirley.
Yes. Working with Ludwig's themes. So it's all about collaboration. Wolfgate makes a good observation here, which is the Vision Quest seems to parallel that of Luke's in the cave, where he sees himself in Vader. But Boba sees both his father and the Sarlacc. Do you see any parallels there, Kim?
Yes, I do. You know, that was one of the things I talked about, flashback sequences or vision sequences, dream sequences rather, in the Star Wars universe, and this is one that I was thinking of. And you know, I do think that, you know, like Vader is Luke's father and has an influence on him. Same with Django, and the Sarlacc was his first rebirth, so, and very traumatic, as birth is, apparently.
Yes, and rebirth. Yeah, I think that it's a good point, only because as we're talking about like the trippiness and, you know, the lizard Vision Quest. Yeah, the cave sequence was like certainly Star Wars' first time doing anything trippy, because it is a trippy sequence, and Luke seeing his own freaking face. I mean, as a kid, that I know that freaked me out. You know, his face on Vader's head, decapitated head. This goes further with it and gives you like a very specific like reason it's happening versus like the Force. But I think that there are some parallels there, and certainly themes of fathers and sons are both big in fiction in general and Star Wars. So I feel like inevitably we're going to see Tamara Morrison play Django again in this show. Don't you think like he'll have something where he'll like, you know, either whether it be a flashback or another lizard trip, you know.
Probably, but now I'm not listening, because I'm thinking about the Sarlacc being a kind of adoptive father to Boba Fett too, so having given birth to him for a second time.
When they did that fake out, when Fennec and Boba did the fake out with the Rancor that's not really there because Luke killed it. I thought, where's Malachi, that sad Rancor keeper? Are we going to bump into him? Is he still crying over losing his Rancor? I hope we'll pop into. There's a lot of people who could pop up in Mos Espa, and he's one of them. Watto's one of them.
Yes.
You know, we'll see. I'll end here on L. Oliver. This was something because literally right before we started doing this, I retweeted my friend Ash Crossan, who did a image from Wreck-It Ralph of like, you know, I'm a bad guy, but I'm not a bad guy, and how that's Star Wars. And I said, oh, Star Wars and Fast and Furious would get along famously. But L. Oliver says, does everyone have to be redeemed? Where are the unrepentant scoundrels?
Well, I think Jabba the Hutt was probably an unrepentant scoundrel, but he's dead.
Palpatine.
Yeah, there you go. But as far as Boba Fett goes, he was never necessarily, a bad guy, just morally gray. He was trying to earn a living, and yes, he liked apparently liked killing people, but that was part of the job. Disintegrations. So there was room for him to explore him further as a character and make him three-dimensional. So
that's how I feel too. I get this, they're like, because this happens just again in fiction, in Star Wars, but also in fiction, TV especially. If we spend a lot of time with a character who's a bad guy, they kind of end up being redeemed, mostly because the audience wants to spend more time with them, and you have to reasonably keep them around without the good guy killing them or locking them up. But I think with Boba, I don't feel like they're cheating or it's too much, just because, like you said, Kim, it's like he was a bounty hunter, but Han Solo was a smuggler, so it's just like, oh, that's part of this world. We didn't know that he was particularly like evil or or nasty. I did laugh in Attack of the Clones that when he's a little kid, he seemed like a little bit of a. I said he seemed like Muttley from the old cartoons, because he was like, "Get him, Dad, get him." But kids will be kids. So yeah, I think it with Boba it's fine, because we had so little to go on prior to this that I don't think they're cheating. But yes, I agree, L. Oliver. Some villains should remain villains. But yeah, there's Jabba, there's Palpatine, there's a few other nasty folks out there. Mm-hmm. We'll leave off there for this week, guys. I'm curious what will happen next week, if they'll start to make that shift that we think might be coming, as far as the present day stuff might to take a little more control here. Oh, by the way, Ryan put in the chat, Boba call Saul, as we're talking about prequels, I'm guessing. I just needed to say that because it's a good saying. Kim, thank you.
Workshop that with my roommate, so I just want to give credit to everybody.
Thank you for that, Ryan. Kim, thanks for chatting some Boba with me. We will be back next week, guys. Thanks a lot. Take care.